The flames had already consumed half of the house by the time Martha Cole realized that screaming for help would do no good, because the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and the outlaws who had set the fire were riding off into the darkness with everything she owned worth taking. She stood in her cotton nightdress in the yard of her small homestead outside Val Verde, Texas, watching 23 years of her life turn to ash and ember under the vast November sky of 1884. The heat pushed against her face, even from 30 feet away, and she could hear the timber beams cracking like rifle shots as they gave way to the hungry blaze. Her father had built that house with his own hands before he died 2 years ago, and her mother had passed in the bedroom upstairs just 6 months later, leaving Martha alone to work the small cattle operation they had carved out of the harsh Texas landscape. She did not cry. There was no point in tears when you had to think about survival. The outlaws had taken her 2 horses, killed her cattle, and stolen the lockbox that contained the $300 she had been saving to buy breeding stock in the spring. They had given her no warning, just kicked in the door while she slept, dragged her outside, and told her this was what happened to people who refused to sell their land to the right buyers. Their leader, a thin man with a scar across his throat that made his voice sound like gravel scraping metal, had leaned close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. He told her that Mr. Dalton wanted this property, and Mr. Dalton always got what he wanted one way or another. Then they had splashed kerosene across her porch and struck a match. Martha watched until the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks that rose toward the stars like furious fireflies. The November night was cold, and she was barefoot in nothing but her nightdress, but she barely felt it. Shock, she supposed. She had heard of people walking through snowstorms without proper clothing and not realizing they were freezing to death until it was too late. She forced herself to move to think. The barn was untouched. The outlaws had emptied it of anything valuable, but the structure itself still stood. She could shelter there until morning, wrap herself in old feed sacks, and then figure out what to do next. Walk to Val Verde, probably. It was 8 miles, but she had no other choice. She had taken maybe 10 steps toward the barn when she heard the hoofbeats. Her heart seized in her chest. They were coming back. Maybe they had decided that leaving her alive was too much of a risk, too much of a loose end. She looked around frantically for somewhere to hide, but there was nothing except open ground and the dim bulk of the barn. The rider was coming fast from the direction of the main road, and she could see the dark shape of horse and man silhouetted against the slightly lighter darkness of the horizon. Martha ran. She did not know where she thought she was going, but her body moved anyway, bare feet pounding across the cold ground. She made it maybe 50 yards before the rider cut her off, the horse wheeling around in front of her so suddenly that she nearly crashed into its shoulder. She stumbled backward and fell hard on her hip, pain shooting through her leg. The rider dismounted in one smooth motion, and Martha scrambled backward on her hands and feet like a crab, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Easy now," the man said, and his voice was nothing like the scarred outlaw's voice. It was deep and calm, the kind of voice you would use with a spooked animal. "I am not going to hurt you. I saw the fire from my place and came to see if anyone needed help." Martha stopped moving but did not get up. She could see him better now in the flickering light from the dying fire. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked hard for his living. He wore a dark hat and she could not see his face clearly, but his hands were raised slightly, palms out in a gesture of peace. "Who are you?" she managed to ask. Her voice sounded strange and thin in her own ears. "Name is Thomas Sutton," he said. "I have a ranch about 3 miles northwest of here. Are you hurt?" "No," she said, though her hip throbbed where she had fallen. "They took everything. They burned it all." Thomas looked past her at the smoking ruins of the house, and even in the poor light she could see his jaw tighten. "How many of them?" "6, maybe 7. I could not count properly. They said a man named Dalton sent them." Thomas muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse. "Harrison Dalton, I should have figured. He has been buying up every piece of land between here and the river for the past year. Most folks sell when he asks, those who do not tend to have accidents." He looked back at her and his voice softened. You cannot stay out here, you will freeze before morning, let me take you somewhere safe. Martha wanted to argue, wanted to say she could take care of herself, but the truth was she was already shivering violently and her feet were going numb. Where? My ranch. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Garza. She will get you warm and fed and find you proper clothes. In the morning, we can figure out what to do next. She studied him for a long moment. She had been raised to be cautious around strangers, especially men, but what choice did she have? She could refuse his help and likely die of exposure before she reached town, or she could trust that not everyone in Texas worked for Harrison Dalton. Something in the way he held himself, in the genuine concern in his voice, made her decide. All right, she said. Thomas stepped forward and offered her his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet with easy strength. Up close, she could see his face better. He was younger than she had first thought, probably close to her own age, with strong features and dark eyes that reflected the firelight. He shrugged out of his coat and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. It was still warm from his body and smelled like leather and wood smoke, and something else she could not name. Can you ride? He asked. Yes. He swung back into the saddle and then reached down to pull her up behind him. Martha hesitated only a second before taking his hand again. She had ridden double before, but never with a stranger, never pressed against a man's back with her arms around his waist. It felt improper and intimate all at once, but propriety seemed like a luxury she could not afford tonight. She settled onto the horse's rump and wrapped her arms around Thomas's solid torso, and then they were moving, the horse breaking into an easy lope that carried them away from the burning wreckage of her life. The ride took maybe 20 minutes. Martha tried to stay alert, to pay attention to landmarks so she would know where she was, but exhaustion and shock were catching up with her. She found herself leaning more heavily against Thomas's back, her cheek pressed against the rough fabric of his shirt. He did not seem to mind. Once, when she started to slip to the side, his hand came back to steady her, his palm warm against her arm. Almost there, he said, and she could feel the rumble of his voice through his back. The Sutton ranch appeared out of the darkness like something from a dream. It was not large by Texas standards, but it was well maintained. She could see a 2-story house with lamplight glowing in the windows, a big barn, several outbuildings, and corrals that held dark shapes she assumed were horses. Everything spoke of care and hard work, the kind of place built by someone who intended to stay. Thomas rode straight up to the house and dismounted, then helped Martha down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, and he kept his hands on her waist until she was steady. The front door opened before they reached it, and a small, round woman with gray, streaked black hair appeared in the doorway. She took one look at Martha and immediately began speaking rapid Spanish, her hands fluttering in distress. English, Rosa, Thomas said gently. She needs your help. Her place was burned out by Dalton's men. Mrs. Garza switched to English without missing a beat. Ay, Dios mío, come in, you poor child. Look at you, half frozen and barefoot. Thomas, you should be ashamed, keeping her out in the cold like this. I just found her, Rosa. Well, do not just stand there. Go put your horse away and let me take care of this girl. Shoo. Despite everything, Martha felt the corner of her mouth twitch at the way the tiny housekeeper ordered the large cowboy around. Thomas caught her almost smile and grinned briefly before tipping his hat and heading back toward the barn. Mrs. Garza ushered Martha inside, clucking like a hen with a lost chick. The interior of the house was warm and clean and smelled like the bread that was apparently rising in the kitchen for tomorrow's breakfast. Mrs. Garza led Martha upstairs to a bedroom that was simply furnished but comfortable, with a real bed and a washstand and a window that looked out over the darkened landscape. The housekeeper disappeared and returned a few minutes later with a pitcher of hot water, clean towels, a nightgown, and a thick wool robe. You wash up and get into these warm things, she said. I will bring you some soup and tea. Are you hurt anywhere? Just bruised, Martha said. Thank you. You are very kind. Kindness has nothing to do with it. It is what any decent person would do. Mrs. Garza paused at the door and looked back at her. Thomas is a good man, one of the best I have known. You are safe here, understand. No one will hurt you while you are under this roof. After the housekeeper left, Martha peeled off her smoke-stained nightdress and washed her face and hands in the hot water. It felt like the greatest luxury in the world. She found burns on her arms that she had not noticed before, small blisters from flying embers, and scrapes on her feet from running barefoot. Nothing serious, nothing that would not heal. She put on the borrowed nightgown and robe and was just sitting down on the edge of the bed when Mrs. Garza returned with a tray holding a bowl of beef soup, cornbread, and hot tea with honey. Martha had not thought she was hungry, but the smell of the food made her stomach clench with sudden desperate need. She ate quickly, barely tasting it, and only when the bowl was empty did she realize that tears were running down her face. Mrs. Garza said nothing, just took the tray and patted Martha's shoulder before leaving her alone. Martha lay down on the bed, pulled the quilt up to her chin, and stared at the ceiling. She should be thinking about what to do next, about how to rebuild or whether to rebuild or where she would go. But all she could think about was the sound of the outlaws' laughter as they set the fire, and the weight of Thomas Sutton's coat around her shoulders, and the strange feeling of safety she had felt with her arms around him on the horse. It made no sense. She did not know him. He was a stranger who had appeared out of the darkness, and yet something in her had recognized something in him, some fundamental decency that made her trust him when she should not have trusted anyone. She was still thinking about it when exhaustion finally pulled her down into sleep. Martha woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from downstairs. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, and then the events of the previous night came crashing back. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding, and had to take several deep breaths to calm herself. It had not been a nightmare. It had really happened. There was a dress laid out on the chair by the window, a simple calico in dark blue, along with undergarments, stockings, and even a pair of worn but serviceable boots. Mrs. Garza must have brought them while Martha slept. She dressed quickly, grateful beyond words for the clothing, even though the dress was a bit too large and had to be cinched tight with the belt. The boots were only slightly too big. She could manage. When she came downstairs, she found Thomas and Mrs. Garza in the kitchen. Thomas was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, dressed in work clothes and looking like he had already been up for hours. He stood when she entered, his manners automatic and natural. "Morning," he said. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Martha admitted. "Thank you for the clothes, Mrs. Garza. They were my daughter's," the housekeeper said. "She married and moved to San Antonio 5 years ago. I am sure she would not mind you having them." Thomas gestured to a chair. "Sit, have some breakfast. We need to talk about what happens next." Martha sat and accepted a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Her appetite was back with a vengeance this morning. Thomas waited until she had eaten a few bites before he spoke again. "I rode out to your place at first light," he said. "Everything is gone. The house burned to the foundation and the barn is empty except for some old tools. I brought back what I could salvage, but it is not much. Some chains, a shovel, a few other odds and ends." "I appreciate that," Martha said quietly. "Dalton's men did a thorough job. I found tracks heading west toward his main ranch, at least 6 riders, like you said." Thomas's jaw was tight. "I am sorry this happened to you. Dalton has been a plague on this county for too long. Why does no one stop him? Because he is rich and he is connected. The sheriff is in his pocket and half the county is afraid of him. The other half works for him." Thomas looked down at his coffee. "I have been fighting him for 2 years. He wants my land too. So far I have been lucky, or stubborn enough that he has not decided it is worth the trouble." Martha set down her fork. "Then you should not be helping me. If he finds out I am here, he might target you next. Let him try." There was steel in Thomas's voice. "I am not afraid of Harrison Dalton." Mrs. Garza made a worried sound but said nothing. "What will you do?" Thomas asked Martha. "Do you have family somewhere, friends who could take you in?" "No," Martha said. "My parents are both dead. I have an aunt in Louisiana, but I have not seen her in 15 years. I do not even know if she is still alive." She took a breath. "I have nothing, no money, no property, no stock. Everything I had is gone." The words hung in the air. It was the truth, stark and terrible. 23 years old and she had nothing to show for her life except the borrowed clothes on her back, Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You could stay here." Martha looked up sharply. "What? Stay here? Work for me? I need help running this place. Mrs. Garza has been asking me to hire someone to help with the house and the cooking, and I could use another hand with the horses. I cannot pay much, but you would have a roof over your head and 3 meals a day. You could save up, figure out what you want to do next." He held her gaze. "It is not charity. You would be earning your keep. I'm offering you a job, that is all." Martha's first instinct was to refuse. She did not want to be anyone's burden, did not want to be the poor, unfortunate creature who had to be rescued. But pride was another luxury she could not afford, and the truth was she had no better option. She could walk to Val Verde and try to find work there, but jobs for women were scarce and mostly involved things like cleaning saloons or worse. At least here she would be safe. At least here she would be treated with respect. "All right," she said. "I accept, thank you, good." Thomas stood up. "I have work to do. Rosa will show you around and get you settled. Tomorrow you can start helping out properly." He put his hat on and headed for the door, then paused and looked back. "For what it is worth, Miss Cole, I am sorry about your home. No one deserves what happened to you. But you are strong, I can tell. You will come back from this." Then he was gone, and Martha was left staring after him, something warm and unexpected kindling in her chest. The days fell into a pattern. Martha rose early and helped Mrs. Garza prepare breakfast for Thomas and the 2 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse, Miguel and Joe. After breakfast, she cleaned the house, did laundry, helped with the cooking, and tended the vegetable garden behind the house. In the afternoons, when the housework was done, Thomas began teaching her how to work with the horses. He raised quarter horses, bred for cattle work and endurance. It was a small operation, maybe 20 head total, but every animal was well cared for and well trained. Thomas had a gift with horses, a patience and understanding that made even the most skittish colt calm under his hands. Martha had grown up around horses, but watching Thomas work was like watching an artist. He never raised his voice, never used force. He just waited and listened and responded, and somehow the horses knew they could trust him. "You have a good seat," he told her one afternoon when she was riding a young mare around the corral. "Did your father teach you?" "Yes, he said anyone living in Texas needed to know how to ride properly." Martha guided the mare through a turn. "I am not as good as you, though. You are better than you think. You just need confidence." Thomas leaned against the fence, his arms crossed over the top rail. "That mare likes you. See how her ears are forward. She is paying attention, trying to figure out what you want." Martha reached down and patted the mare's neck. "What is her name?" "Does not have one yet. I was going to sell her, but I have been thinking maybe I should keep her. She has good bloodlines and a sweet temperament. She would make a fine brood mare." He paused. "Or a fine horse for you if you want her." "Thomas, I cannot accept that." "Why not? You need a horse. She needs a rider. Seems practical to me." "You have already done so much. I told you, you are earning your keep. Consider it part of your wages." He pushed off the fence. "Come on, let us see how she does at a canter." Martha found herself smiling as she urged the mare into a faster gait. It had been a long time since she had smiled without forcing it, maybe not since before her mother died. But something about being here, working hard, learning new things, made her feel alive again. Made her feel like maybe she could rebuild after all, even if it was not in the way she had originally planned. In the evenings, after supper, Thomas would sometimes sit on the porch and play his harmonica while the sun set. Martha began joining him, sitting in the other chair with mending or knitting in her lap. They did not talk much during these times. There was something comfortable about the silence, about the simple fact of being in each other's presence. Sometimes Mrs. Garza would join them, and she would tell stories about when she was young in Mexico, or about Thomas as a boy after his parents died, and he came to live with his uncle who had owned this ranch before him. "He was so serious," Mrs. Garza said one evening, her knitting needles clicking. 10 years old, and he already acted like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. His uncle tried to get him to play, to act like a child, but Thomas was always working, always trying to prove himself. "Someone had to keep the place running," Thomas said mildly. "Uncle Frank was better at drinking than ranching." "Your uncle was a good man who had a hard life," Mrs. Garza said, But yes, he liked his whiskey. Thomas basically ran this ranch from the time he was 14. When Frank died, he left it to Thomas. Best decision he ever made. Martha looked at Thomas with new understanding. How old were you when he died? 18, old enough to make it legal. Thomas set down the harmonica. He taught me everything important, though, how to treat people fairly, how to judge a horse, how to know when someone is trying to cheat you. And he taught me that land is worth fighting for. Is that why you will not sell to Dalton? Partly. Also because I know what he would do with this place. He would graze it into dust, take everything he could from it, and then move on to the next property. He does not care about the land. He just cares about money. Thomas's voice was quiet but intense. This ranch is my home. My uncle's grave is up on that hill. I will die before I let Harrison Dalton take it. The conviction in his words made something twist in Martha's chest. She understood that kind of loyalty, that kind of love for a place. She had felt it about her own homestead, still felt it even though the homestead was gone. I understand, she said softly. Thomas looked at her, and in the fading light his eyes were very dark. I know you do. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Martha could not quite name. Then Mrs. Garza cleared her throat and announced she was going to bed, and the spell was broken. But Martha lay awake that night thinking about the way Thomas had looked at her, and the way her heart had sped up under his gaze. Thanksgiving came, and Mrs. Garza prepared a feast that seemed impossible for just 5 people to eat. Turkey and cornbread stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans cooked with bacon, sweet potatoes, biscuits, and 2 kinds of pie. They ate in the dining room, which was usually reserved for special occasions, and for a while Martha could almost forget that a month ago her life had been destroyed. There was laughter around the table and warmth, and a sense of belonging that she had not felt since her parents were alive. After dinner, Thomas asked if she wanted to take a walk. The night was cold but clear, the stars brilliant overhead. They walked down toward the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the property, their breath forming white clouds in the air. Are you happy here? Thomas asked. I mean, I know happy might not be the right word given everything, but are you doing all right? I am, Martha said and realized she meant it. Everyone has been so kind, sometimes I feel guilty about it. Guilty, why? Because I should be grieving, I should be devastated, and I am in a way, but I also feel grateful and hopeful. And I do not know if I am allowed to feel those things when I lost everything. Thomas stopped walking and turned to face her. You are allowed to feel however you feel. Grief does not work on a schedule, Martha, and hope is not a betrayal of what you lost. It is how you survive. Is that how you survived when your parents died? Eventually, it took a long time, but yes. He looked up at the stars. I think they would want me to be happy. I think they would want me to build a good life. That is what I am trying to do. You are doing more than trying. You have succeeded. I do not know about that. The ranch is doing well enough, but it is a lot of work for one person. I always thought by now I would have a partner, someone to share it all with. He glanced at her, then away. I am not very good at courting, I guess. Never seemed to have the time to meet anyone, and the few women I did meet were not interested in the life of a rancher's wife. Martha's heart was beating faster. What kind of woman would you want, if you could choose? Someone strong, someone who is not afraid of hard work. Someone who loves this land the way I do. His voice dropped lower. Someone I can talk to, someone who makes me want to come inside at the end of the day instead of staying out in the barn. Thomas, Martha said, and he looked at her. I know I should not be saying these things. You have been through hell. The last thing you need is me complicating your life. He took off his hat and ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. But I need you to know, these past few weeks having you here, it has been the best few weeks I can remember. You fit here, Martha. You fit in a way I did not expect, and I do not want you to leave. Martha took a step closer to him. I do not want to leave either. You do not. No, she reached up and touched his face, her fingers brushing against the stubble on his jaw. I feel it too, Thomas, whatever this is between us. I have been trying not to feel it, because it seems too fast, too soon, but I cannot help it. Thomas caught her hand and held it against his cheek. I have been half in love with you since the moment I saw you running across that field in your nightdress, too stubborn to give up even when everything was burning down around you. You are the strongest woman I have ever met. I did not feel very strong. That is what made it so impressive. You were terrified and you kept going anyway. He turned his head and kissed her palm, and the touch of his lips against her skin sent heat racing through her entire body. I want to court you properly. I want to do this right, but I needed you to know how I feel. I am glad you told me, Martha whispered. They stood there in the starlight, her hand in his, and Martha felt something inside her that had been broken begin to mend. It was not the same as what she had lost. It would never be the same. But it was something new, something precious, and she wanted to hold on to it with both hands. December brought cold rain and gray skies. The work on the ranch continued regardless of the weather. Thomas spent long days mending fences and moving cattle to winter pasture, coming home exhausted and mud splattered. Martha helped Mrs. Garza prepare for Christmas, making candles and baking cookies and sewing new curtains for the parlor. In the evenings, she and Thomas would sit by the fire and talk about everything and nothing. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to expand the horse breeding operation, about maybe buying the property to the south if it ever came up for sale. She told him about her childhood, about her father teaching her to rope and her mother teaching her to read, about the time she fell in the creek and nearly drowned and her father dove in fully clothed to save her. He must have been a good man, Thomas said. He was, so was my mother. I wish you could have met them. I wish I could have too. On Christmas Eve, Thomas gave her a present wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a pair of riding gloves, butter-soft leather lined with fleece. For when we go riding, he said, your hands get cold. Martha blinked back tears. She had not expected a gift, had not even thought about it. I did not get you anything. You are here. That is enough. Mrs. Garza gave Martha a hand-knitted shawl in soft green wool. Miguel and Joe gave her a carving of a horse that Joe had made, surprisingly delicate work from the gruff cowboy's big hands. It was not the Christmas Martha had imagined a year ago, but it was full of warmth and care, and that night she cried herself to sleep for the first time since the fire. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude for these people who had taken her in and made her part of their family. January arrived with bitter cold and a hard frost that turned the world silver. Thomas taught Martha how to break ice on the water troughs and how to check the horses' hooves for stones. She was getting stronger from the physical work, her hands developing calluses, her arms and legs lean with muscle. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked older, harder, but also more confident, more alive. One afternoon in mid-January, Martha was hanging laundry when she saw riders approaching from the direction of the main road. 5 men on horseback, moving at an easy pace. Something about them made her uneasy. She dropped the sheet she was holding and ran toward the barn where Thomas was working with one of the horses. Thomas, riders coming. He came out of the barn immediately, his hand dropping automatically to the gun belt he wore when he was working. How many? 5. His jaw tightened. Get in the house, stay with Rosa. If there is trouble, you both go out the back and head for the creek. There is a line shack about a mile downstream. You can hide there. Thomas, I am not leaving you. Martha, please. He looked at her and his eyes were fierce. I need to know you are safe. I cannot think straight if I am worrying about you. Please. She wanted to argue, but the look on his face stopped her. She nodded and ran for the house. Mrs. Garza was already at the window peering out at the approaching riders. It is Dalton, she said grimly. I recognize his horse. Martha felt her stomach drop. She moved to the window and looked out. The man in the lead was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and an expensive coat. He sat his horse like a king surveying his domain. The 4 men with him were clearly hired guns, hard-faced and alert. Thomas walked out to meet them, stopping a few yards from the porch. His hand rested casually on his gun, but Martha could see the tension in his shoulders. The riders stopped, and Harrison Dalton smiled down at him. It was not a friendly smile. Sutton, Dalton said. Been a while. Not long enough. What do you want, Dalton? Just being neighborly. Thought I would stop by and see how you are doing. Heard you took in that Cole girl after her unfortunate accident. It was not an accident. Your men burned her out. Now, why would my men do something like that? I run a legitimate business operation. If anything illegal happened to Miss Cole's property, well, that is a matter for the sheriff. Dalton's smile widened. Of course, I did offer to buy her land fair and square before she had her troubles. Shame she did not take the deal. She would still have a home. Thomas's hand tightened on his gun. Get off my property. Easy now. I'm here to make you an offer too. I am prepared to pay you $2,000 for this ranch. That is well above market value, Sutton. You could take that money and start fresh somewhere else. California, maybe Oregon. Lot of opportunities out west for a young man like you. This is as west as I plan to get, and my ranch is not for sale. Everything is for sale at the right price. $3,000, final offer. No, Dalton's smile faded. You are making a mistake. The only mistake I am making is wasting time talking to you. You have 10 seconds to get off my land before I help you leave. The four hired guns tensed, their hands moving toward their weapons. Martha's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. This was it. This was how people died in Texas, over land and pride and refusal to back down, but Dalton held up his hand, stopping his men. I admire your courage, Sutton, stupid but admirable. Just remember, when things start going bad for you, when your horses start dying and your fences start getting cut and your water gets poisoned, I gave you a way out. I gave you a choice. He turned his horse and rode away, his men following. Thomas stood absolutely still until they were out of sight, and then his shoulders sagged slightly. Martha ran out of the house, ignoring Mrs. Garza's protest. Are you all right? She asked, touching his arm. I am fine. He will not do anything today, too many witnesses. Thomas looked down at her. But he will do something soon. I need to be ready. What are you going to do? Whatever I have to. This is my home, Martha. I am not giving it up without a fight. The weeks that followed were tense. Thomas hired 2 more men to help guard the property at night. He moved the horses closer to the house and started keeping the best breeding stock in the barn instead of the pasture. He rode the fence line every day, checking for signs of tampering. Miguel and Joe carried rifles everywhere they went. The ranch felt like a fort under siege. Martha hated it. She hated the constant worry, the way Thomas came in each night looking exhausted and grim. She hated feeling helpless, knowing that Dalton had the money and the men and the power to do whatever he wanted. But she also saw Thomas's determination, his refusal to be intimidated, and she loved him for it. She had not said the words out loud yet, but she knew it was true. She was in love with Thomas Sutton, and the thought of anything happening to him made her feel sick with fear. In early February, the attacks began. Someone cut the fence on the north pasture and ran off 6 head of cattle. A few days later, they found one of the horses dead in the field, shot through the head. Thomas reported it to the sheriff, but the sheriff just shrugged and said he would look into it, and they all knew nothing would come of it. The law in Val Verde belonged to Harrison Dalton. We need to fight back, Joe said one evening. They were all gathered in the kitchen trying to figure out what to do. We know where Dalton's men drink. We could ambush them, send a message, and then we would be the outlaws, Thomas said. That is what he wants. He wants us to do something stupid so he can have us arrested or killed and claim it was self-defense. So we just sit here and let him pick us apart. No, we protect what is ours and we do not give him an excuse. Thomas looked around the table. I know this is hard. But we have to be smarter than him. We have to outlast him. For how long? Miguel asked quietly. Thomas did not have an answer. That night, Martha could not sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. This could not go on. Someone was going to get killed. Maybe Thomas. Maybe one of the ranch hands, maybe even her or Mrs. Garza. And for what? For land. For pride. For the principle of not letting a bully win. She got up and put on the robe and went downstairs. There was a lamp burning in the parlor, and she found Thomas there, sitting in a chair by the cold fireplace. He looked up when she came in. Could not sleep either, he asked. No, she sat down in the chair across from him. Thomas, maybe you should consider selling. Not to Dalton, but to someone else. You could take the money and buy land somewhere else, somewhere he does not have power. You think I should run? I think I do not want you to die for a piece of land. It is not just land, Martha. It is my home. It is everything my uncle built. It is the life I want to have. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. If I sell now, I am telling Dalton and every other thief in Texas that might makes right, that if you have enough money and enough guns, you can take whatever you want. I cannot do that. I will not do that. Even if it costs you everything, even then. He stood up and came to kneel in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. But I need you to understand something. This is my fight. I never meant to drag you into it. If you want to leave, if you want to go somewhere safe, I will give you money for a ticket anywhere you want to go. I will not hold it against you. Do you want me to leave? God, no. I want you to stay forever. I want to marry you and build a life with you and raise children on this land. But I will not ask you to stay if it means putting you in danger. Martha felt tears burning in her eyes. I am not going anywhere. I already lost one home. I am not losing another. We will fight him together, Thomas, whatever it takes. He pulled her down from the chair and kissed her, and it was nothing like the chaste kisses they had shared before. This was desperate and fierce and full of everything they had been holding back. Martha kissed him back just as hard, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressed against his. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Marry me," Thomas said. "I know it is too soon, and I know I am asking you to share a dangerous life, but I do not want to wait. Marry me, Martha?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They rode into Val Verde the next morning and found the preacher. He was an old man with kind eyes who asked no questions about why they wanted to marry so quickly. Mrs. Garza and Miguel came as witnesses. Joe stayed behind to guard the ranch. The ceremony was brief and simple, just the words and the vows and the ring that Thomas slipped onto her finger. It had been his mother's ring, a plain gold band that fit perfectly. Martha Cole became Martha Sutton in a dusty church in a small Texas town, and when Thomas kissed her as his wife, she felt like the luckiest woman alive. They had a wedding dinner at the hotel restaurant, and Mrs. Garza cried happy tears, and for a few hours they forgot about Harrison Dalton and his threats. For a few hours they were just two people in love, starting a life together. That night, in the bedroom that was now their bedroom, Thomas made love to his wife with a tenderness that made Martha cry. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, and Martha traced the scars on his chest from years of ranch work. "I love you," she said. It was the first time she had said it out loud. "I love you too," Thomas replied. "I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you. I just did not want to admit it to myself." "Why not?" "Because I was afraid you would leave, afraid I would lose you the way I lost everyone else." He kissed her forehead. "But I am not afraid anymore. Whatever happens, we will face it together." "Together," Martha agreed. February turned into March. The attacks on the ranch continued, but they were random and sporadic. A broken fence here, a dead chicken there. It felt like Dalton was toying with them, testing their resolve. Thomas remained vigilant, but Martha could see the strain wearing on him. He was not sleeping well, and he had lost weight. She did what she could to help, taking over more of the ranch work, freeing him up to focus on security. She learned to shoot a rifle properly, and Thomas taught her how to handle a revolver. Mrs. Garza kept the shotgun by the kitchen door loaded and ready. In late March, Martha realized her monthly bleeding was late. She waited another week to be sure, and then she told Thomas. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, fear, before settling on determined resolve. "We are going to protect this child," he said, his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to protect you, whatever it takes." "I know," Martha said. "I am not worried." It was not entirely true. She was worried, but she was also happy in a way she had not expected to be. She was going to be a mother. She and Thomas were going to have a family. The future suddenly felt real and precious and worth fighting for. In April, everything came to a head. Thomas got word from a friend in town that Dalton was planning something big. He did not know what, but he knew it was coming soon. They doubled the guard, kept the horses in the barn at night, and waited. The attack came on a moonless night in mid-April. Martha woke to the sound of gunfire and Thomas already out of bed, pulling on his pants and grabbing his rifle. She got up too, her heart hammering, and followed him downstairs. Mrs. Garza was already in the kitchen with the shotgun, her face pale but determined. "How many?" Thomas asked Joe, who had run in from outside. "At least a dozen. They are trying to set fire to the barn." Thomas cursed and headed for the door. Martha grabbed his arm. "Do not go out there, they will kill you. If they burn the barn, they kill the horses. I cannot let that happen." He kissed her hard and fast. "Stay inside, protect yourself and the baby." Then he was gone, running out into the darkness with Joe and Miguel. Martha could hear more gunfire, shouting, the frightened whinnies of the horses. She wanted to follow him, wanted to fight, but she knew she had to think about the child growing inside her. She gripped the shotgun misses. Garza had pressed into her hands and moved to the window. The scene outside was chaos. Men with torches were trying to reach the barn, and Thomas and the ranch hands were shooting at them from cover. One of the attackers went down, then another. But there were so many of them, and they kept coming. Martha saw one man make it to the barn with his torch and throw it onto the roof. The dry wood caught immediately. "No," Martha breathed. She ran for the door despite Mrs. Garza's shouted protest. She could not let the barn burn, could not let those horses die the way her home had died. She ran across the yard, keeping low, and grabbed a bucket from the water trough. The water was icy cold, but she did not care. She threw it at the flames on the barn roof, knowing it would not be enough but unable to stop trying. A hand grabbed her arm and spun her around. It was the scarred outlaw from that terrible night months ago, the one who had burned her house. He grinned at her, and his voice was that same gravel scrape. "Remember me, little lady? I told you that you should have sold." Martha swung the bucket at his head. It connected with a solid thunk, and he staggered back. She did not wait to see if he would recover. She ran back toward the house, but another man stepped out of the shadows and blocked her path. This one had his gun drawn, then Thomas was there, slamming into the man from the side. They went down in a tangle of limbs, fighting for the gun. Martha heard the shot, saw Thomas jerk, and screamed, but Thomas kept fighting, and finally he got the gun and brought it up and fired. The outlaw went limp. Thomas got to his feet, clutching his side. Blood was seeping between his fingers. "Get inside," he told Martha, his voice tight with pain. "You are shot. It is not bad. Get inside." More gunfire erupted from the direction of the barn. Martha saw Miguel go down, saw Joe drag him to cover. The attackers were retreating now, falling back under the determined defense. Within minutes, they were gone, riding away into the night and leaving bodies behind. Thomas collapsed before they reached the house. Martha caught him and lowered him to the ground, shouting for help. Mrs. Garza came running with lamps, and together they got him inside and onto the kitchen table. The bullet had gone through his side, missing anything vital but leaving a ragged wound that bled freely. Martha forced herself to stay calm, to remember everything her mother had taught her about treating injuries. She boiled water and clean cloth, and she cleaned and bound the wound while Thomas gritted his teeth and did not make a sound. By the time she was done, dawn was breaking, and she could see the full extent of the damage. The barn roof was burned but not destroyed. They had caught it in time. 3 of Dalton's men were dead in the yard. Miguel had a bullet through his shoulder but would survive. Joe was unhurt except for bruises and scrapes. And Thomas was alive, pale and in pain but alive. The sheriff came out later that morning, summoned by someone in town who had heard the gunfire. He looked at the bodies, at the burned barn, at Thomas lying injured in his bed, and he shook his head. "This has gone too far," he said. "I have been turning a blind eye to Dalton because he pays me to, but I cannot ignore this. He will hang for this." "He was not here," Thomas said from the bed. "He sent his men. He always sends his men." "Then I will find proof that he ordered it. I swear to you, Sutton, I will make this right." Thomas did not look like he believed him, and Martha did not either. But 2 days later, the sheriff arrested Harrison Dalton and 4 of his top men. Word spread through the county that the prosecutor had a witness, one of the wounded attackers who had agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. The trial was set for June. Thomas recovered slowly. The wound in his side healed without infection, but he had lost a lot of blood, and it took time for his strength to return. Martha cared for him with fierce devotion, and gradually the color came back to his face and he was able to walk without help. By the time the trial began, he was almost back to his old self. The trial lasted 3 days. Martha and Thomas sat in the courtroom and listened to the testimony. The witness, a man named Garrett who had been one of Dalton's hired guns, told the whole story. how Dalton had ordered them to drive out anyone who would not sell, how he had paid them extra to burn the Cole homestead, how he had ordered the attack on the Sutton ranch with instructions to kill if necessary. By the time Garrett was done talking, there was no doubt in anyone's mind. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. They found Harrison Dalton guilty of arson, conspiracy, attempted murder, and a host of other charges. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in prison. His men got similar sentences. It was over. Thomas and Martha walked out of the courthouse into the bright June sunshine, and for the first time in months, Martha felt like she could breathe properly. It was really over. They were safe. Their home was safe. They could finally build the life they wanted without looking over their shoulders. "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked. "I am thinking I want to go home," Martha said. "I want to see our ranch. I want to start planning the nursery. I want to live our life." Thomas smiled and took her hand. "Then let us go home." The months that followed were the happiest Martha had ever known. The ranch thrived. With Dalton gone, several of his properties went up for sale, and Thomas was able to buy the land to the south at a good price. It doubled the size of their operation. They hired more men, bought more horses, and expanded the breeding program. Martha's belly grew round with the baby, and Thomas was constantly touching it, talking to it, making plans. In late September, Martha went into labor. It was long and hard, and there were moments when she thought she could not do it. But Mrs. Garza was there coaching her through, and when Thomas was finally allowed into the room, he held her hand and told her she was the strongest person he had ever known. At dawn, their son was born, a healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs and his father's dark eyes. They named him Frank after Thomas's uncle. Thomas cried when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face without shame. "Thank you," he whispered to Martha. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything." "We did this together," Martha said. "We built this together." Frank grew strong and healthy. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything. Thomas was a devoted father, carrying the boy on his shoulders while he worked, teaching him the names of the horses, showing him how the ranch operated. Martha watched them together and felt her heart swell with love. They went back to her old homestead one day in the spring of 1886, more than a year after the fire. The ruins of the house were still there, charred timbers and the stone foundation. Weeds had grown up around it, and wildflowers bloomed in what had once been her mother's garden. It hurt to see it, but the pain was distant now, softened by time and happiness. "Do you want to rebuild here?" Thomas asked. "We could make this a line shack or build a proper cabin. You could have this land again." Martha considered it. Part of her wanted to say yes, to reclaim what had been taken from her. But another part, the part that had grown and changed over the past 2 years, knew the truth. This place was her past. The ranch with Thomas was her future. "No," she said. "Let it go back to grass. Let it be what it wants to be. I have a home now. I have you and Frank and the ranch. I do not need this anymore." Thomas put his arm around her and pulled her close. "You are an amazing woman, Martha Sutton. I am a lucky woman. I lost everything and gained something better." She looked up at him. "I gained you." They stood there for a while, watching the wind move through the grass, and then they rode home together. Over the years that followed, the Sutton Ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Their quarter horses were known for quality and temperament, and people came from as far as San Antonio to buy breeding stock. Martha and Thomas had 3 more children, a daughter named Rose, another son named James, and finally a second daughter named Sarah. The house was always full of noise and laughter and the controlled chaos of a large family. Miguel recovered from his shoulder wound and stayed on as foreman. Joe married a girl from town and built a house on the southern edge of the property. Mrs. Garza remained the heart of the household, ruling the kitchen and spoiling the grandchildren she claimed by affection if not by blood. The ranch became not just a business but a community, a place where people came together and built something lasting. Martha and Thomas grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their struggles, of course. Drought years when the grass turned brown and they had to sell off stock. A bad winter when they lost fences and had to rebuild. The usual trials of life and ranching. But they faced everything together, and nothing ever broke them. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Martha back to the place where they had first kissed, by the creek under the stars. They were both in their 40s now, their hair showing threads of gray, their faces marked by years of sun and wind. But when Thomas looked at Martha, he still saw the brave woman in the borrowed nightdress who had refused to give up. And when Martha looked at Thomas, she still saw the cowboy who had ridden out of the darkness to save her. "I would do it all again," Thomas said. "Every hard day, every fight, every moment of fear, I would do it all again to end up here with you." "So would I," Martha said. "I lost my home, but I found my life. I found you." They kissed under the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, and the years fell away until they were young again, just starting out, full of hope and determination and love. And when they walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, they could see the lights burning in the windows and hear the distant voices of their children and grandchildren, and they knew they had built something that would last long after they were gone. The ranch prospered for generations. Frank took over when Thomas got too old to manage it, and he ran it with the same integrity his father had taught him. Rose married a neighboring rancher and combined their properties into something even larger. James became a veterinarian and returned to care for the horses he had grown up loving. Sarah became a teacher and taught in the one-room schoolhouse in Val Verde. Thomas Sutton died at the age of 73, peacefully in his sleep with Martha beside him. She held his hand as he took his last breath, and she told him she loved him one more time. He was buried on the hill next to his uncle under a stone that read simply, "Thomas Sutton, 1861–1934. Good man, good husband, good father." Martha lived another 8 years without him. She spent her days surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories about the old days, about the fire and the attack, and how their grandfather had been the bravest man she ever knew. She told them about building a life from ashes, about finding love when she had nothing left to give, about the power of choosing to rebuild instead of giving up. She died on a warm spring morning in 1942, sitting in her favorite chair on the porch, looking out over the land that she and Thomas had fought for. Her last words were, "I am coming, Thomas, wait for me." They buried her next to her husband on the hill, and the stone read, "Martha Cole Sutton, 1861–1942. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. Strong until the end, the ranch continued, passed down through the generations, and every Sutton who worked that land knew the story of how it all began. They knew about the outlaws who burned the homestead, about the cowboy who gave shelter to a woman who had lost everything, about the love that grew from ashes and disaster. They knew that sometimes the worst moments of your life can lead to the best, if you are brave enough to keep going, if you are strong enough to rebuild, if you are lucky enough to find someone who will stand beside you through the fire. And on quiet nights, when the wind blew just right across the Texas hills, you could almost hear the sound of a harmonica playing on the porch, and the soft laughter of a man and woman who had loved each other through hardship and triumph, through youth and age, through everything life could throw at them. Their love had built something lasting, something real, something that would endure as long as the land itself. And that, in the end, was the greatest legacy anyone could leave behind.